A week ago, the inline-4-engined Yamaha recorded the best ever MotoGP lap at Jerez, which is funny timing, because 2 weeks ago, Yamaha was out and about in Valencia testing its new V4 engine. Now, we've heard some new bits and pieces about what's happening in Yamaha's V4 land, namely through Augusto Fernandez, who was testing it at Valencia and then ran the inline-4 at Jerez. Simon, before we get a bit more into the future of that project, the outlook, why was Fernandez at Jerez with an inline-4? Wouldn't it have made sense for him to campaign the V4?
Because, simply put, the V4 bike is nowhere near ready. They've built a V4 engine and they're testing that, but because of the completely different dimensions of a V4 versus an inline-4, it isn't just a case of building a new engine, slotting it into the current bike and going racing with it. They essentially have to start from scratch and build a whole new MotoGP bike to contain this new V4 engine. So what Augusto Fernandez was running at Valencia during their test was, it seems, some sort of a test mule where it was a frame that they kind of cobbled together to fit the engine into, mainly to be able to take the engine onto track and confirm the numbers and the data that they've already seen from running it in the dyno. So this was not in any way, shape or form a MotoGP bike. It was simply an engine with enough bits around it to carry it to make sure that they were able to take it on track and see what it does there.
Yeah, so if it wildcarded, who knows how many seconds it would have been off the pace. You learn literally nothing. It's not, anyway, it's not going to be anything like the actual bike that's actually going to exist. We still don't have a good picture for when it might even wildcard, do we? There was a discussion about just, later in the year at some point, but there's no clarity on that, right?
No, there's no numbers on that whatsoever. There's been a bit of a running joke with Augusto and the press pull of MotoGP that we'll see him back on the actual V4 race bike at Motegi at Yamaha's home race in October, but it is very much a joke at this point. It's not set in stone, and it really depends on the progress of that development. They've tested the engine on track now in some form. Whether or not that means that they now have to go back and build a different version of the engine or not is the next question. And all of that has to happen while they're also trying to, improve this chassis, this whole new frame that it goes in. And at the same time, they've got a MotoGP project, as we're going to come to, that's now suddenly starting to work. So, is that going to take some of the resources, especially in the frame and chassis department, that should be, in theory, building the new V4 bike away from that project and concentrating it on the here and now because they're delivering some results at last?
Yeah, we'll get that in a second, but it does sort of feel like Yamaha is currently living in like Monopoly money world, where you have these two concurrent projects running around, both of which sound super expensive. And there's going to be another one down the line. We'll get to that in a second. So Yamaha's official line about the V4 alongside the inline-4 is that the V4 will make its debut, will start being raced, not as a wild card, but by regular riders once it's quicker, specifically quicker than the inline-4 engine and the bike built around the inline-4, the tried and tested M1 machine. That's not the vibe from the riders when they were talking about it. Again, Augusto Fernandez, all weekend, even after Fabio Quartararo's superb Sunday performance, was basically like, I believe that the V4 is the way forward, and I believe that the rest of the project, the rest of the company, also feels that way. Quartararo himself, a little more cagey, but I think it's clear that he's been a primary driver between wanting the V4, wanting its specific characteristics. Simon, do you see a scenario where those wishes change necessarily? Because even despite the Jerez weekend, and again, lap record, podium, the closest we've seen anybody run Ducatis, well, I guess since Qatar, because Maverick Vinales ran them close, but you know what I mean. Do you see that suddenly changing, that after all of these years of massive stagnation with the inline-4 M1, suddenly, there's a real dilemma here, or not really?
Yeah, we've seen Yamaha put themselves in a bit of a tricky position right now, to be perfectly honest, where, the riders are not going to want to make a change to a whole new bike if the one that they're riding right now is working. And it looks right now like the inline-4 is working. We started this season speculating that maybe we'd see something like a mid-season switch to the V4 if that bike proved to be better than the current M1. And that now, to me, looks like a completely unrealistic thing, because it looks like this current M1 is actually a pretty good machine. So it will, I think, take a really important testing program at some point later in the year to convince the likes of Fabio Quartararo that the V4 is the machine that he needs to be on for the future and for, more immediately the 2026 season. It's going to disrupt their program. It's going to cause a setback. They're going to go from where they are, the level they're at right now. If they can maintain that, they are going to step back when they jump on a new bike. That is only natural, especially considering that, Fabio Quartararo, again in particular, has only ever rode a Yamaha inline 4 in MotoGP. It's not like the likes of Jack Miller or Miguel Oliveira or even Alex Rins, who have quite a bit of experience riding V4s in MotoGP as well. So it's going to be a case of balancing that. It's going to be a case of them needing to bring a bike to a private test, most likely not one of the official ones that Yamaha are allowed to do because of the concession status. Quartararo jumping on a more finished, more refined V4 project and kind of being blown away by it, I think, before we're going to see him ready to make such a substantial move.
I think it is also important to note that, Fabio Quartararo at Jerez can be a bit of an outlier. You look at Quartararo's history at Jerez, he won the Spanish Moto3 title there with a dominant win to go from 5th to 1st in the standings in that season finale, if I'm not mistaken. Youngest ever Moto3 poleman at the track. Youngest ever MotoGP poleman also took that record at the track, won his first MotoGP race, and a week later won his second MotoGP race there. So Fabio can do magic at Jerez that I think it's clear from the weekend that we saw wasn't necessarily accessible to the other Yamaha riders, even if the M1 is better. But I think it also is important to note that Quartararo has been yelping for 2 seasons basically about being slaughtered on the straights and being unable to race the inline 4, even if it does good lap times by itself and clean air, whatever, being unable to race it against the V4s. He might change his mind if he tries the V4 and it's an unwieldy big thing, but there's also the matter, as you pointed out earlier in the season, the belief in the paddock is that the V4 might have to be the way to go for 27 anyway, right? For the 850cc engines, and not because of the engine capacity or anything like that necessarily.
I mean, there is an argument to be made that there is still more potential for Yamaha to take from the inline 4. Because, we saw just before they departed from MotoGP that basically the fastest bike on the grid at that point was the Suzuki with its inline 4 engine. So there is more that can be done with the current Yamaha power plant, I think, to extract more speed from it. And it's going to be interesting to see how they keep developing that over the season and where that takes them, because maybe they unlock something there that means that the V4 project then essentially becomes null and void, because they build a bike like the final iteration of the Suzuki that was super fast in the straights but could also maintain that corner speed. And I think it's quite notable that even at the Jerez post-race test, Yamaha bought a new inline 4 engine that was quite a little bit faster. So there's work going on in that way as well. The problem is, as you say, Val, that there's this kind of belief among some people I've spoken to in the paddock that an inline 4 is basically going to be redundant once we go to the new rules and the 850 era of MotoGP in 2027, because as we reduce the size of the bikes, physically reduce the size of the bikes, that's going to mean that what aero you have is going to be more and more important. And if you can run a substantially narrower engine and a narrower bike as a result, like a V4 package gives you versus an inline 4, then it means you have more space on each side of the bike to stick on bigger wings and more aero. So if we believe that aero is going to remain as important as it does right now, and it won't remain as important because things like the ride height devices going away will affect the balance of the aero performance a little bit. But if you believe that it's still going to be a fundamental part of a MotoGP bike, then you're going to have to try and extract every possible benefit you can from the smaller amount of it you have. And that may mean that those kind of 4 cylinders wide V4 inline 4 engines are going to have to be replaced by, an engine that is essentially half as wide.
What's your gut feeling on this? Because looking at it from the outside, this is a manufacturer that's doing 2 separate massive engine projects like a year and a half away from the next regulation cycle that will require a totally new, different engine project. Is that impressive, or is that bananas bonkers nonsense?
It's a little bit of both. They're obviously spending massive amounts of funding to make this happen. And, if anything we learn from this, it really, really underlines any belief or any thought that Yamaha might be interested in walking away from MotoGP because of their bad results. I think we can look at everything they're doing right now, and that's essentially a laughable notion because of just how much they're pumping into this project. My gut feeling is that the 850 will have to be in a V4 for all the reasons we mentioned, plus because of just the amount of money they're spending to make it happen.
Yeah.
But I'm not convinced that we're going to see 1000cc V4 Yamaha in 2026, because I think it's all going to depend on the project timeline. It's all going to rely on when they can get the finished or the close to finished V4 bike into the hands of Fabio Quartararo in particular. And if that comes pretty late in the year, or even into the start of next year, then I think he's going to choose to stick with what he's got instead.